There are things that I say no to, either because there's too much of a personal connection to it, or maybe I'm, both either because I either know people that are involved in it.
Another thing you taught me is that sometimes we don't ask the questions because we don't want to hear the answer. And that really helped me in sitting with, especially with kids. Sometimes you don't want to ask if they want to kill somebody because you're afraid that what the answer might be.
Yeah. Remembering what the end result could look like and how it could look different, to me, is the rewarding part of what I do involved in these cases.
Welcome to Look for the Helpers, a podcast by Engage Therapy in Agoura Hills, California. Hosted by Adelina Brisbois, licensed marriage and family therapist, and her husband, Dr. Blake Brisbois, licensed psychologist. Thanks for being here.
So why we wanted to do this podcast was because we realized that we have these really meaningful conversations with our peers all the time about all the things that we're all doing and how we're all helping. And, Blake and I, the reason why we're in this field is to help people. And, Fred Rogers has this famous quote, at least it's famous to us, about when there's a crisis. His mom told him, when there's a crisis and you're looking at it on the news or you're there, look for the helpers. There's always people running into the crisis to help. And he said that if we could just focus a little bit more on that kids, especially, and ourselves as adults too, might hold a little bit more hope for the future, that there's all these people that are going in to help when bad stuff happens. And so that's why we want to call our podcast Look for the Helpers, because we believe in that. We believe that we are always looking for helpers. We also really feel strongly about teaming up with helpers in our community. And so this podcast is really set up to help the person who's listening, whoever that is, a professional, a parent, a peer, people in our community, and also maybe people outside of our community. But we're really focused on Conejo Valley and how to help our special little section of the world here. And so that's what this podcast is sort of setting out to do. And you're our first guest, which is really special and important to us.
Honored to be the first guest.
Well, because actually it's really fitting because you're the person who hired both Blake and I at Engage and really started our journey here in the Conejo Valley. Because while we were both therapists before, we really were not, we didn't live out here yet and we weren't working here yet. And so because of you, it really established us as professionals here and beginning to build relationships, and you've been our mentor ever since then. And so we're really excited to have you. And as I was just saying, there's so much we could talk about because you have so many specialties. So I just want to kind of, maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit as to how did you get here to become the helper that you are in all the ways that you do help.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me and to be your first guest. And let me respond to both of you. And I think what's been most rewarding is watching what you guys have done. And I was even talking with some people about this last week, that it's rewarding to see that somebody takes something that you've been involved in and you make it better. And you really continued, and I think you've built out in a way this idea of making mental health a community issue, something that you've invited people into, because I think, like we know, it's not going to be just the professionals that are going to sort of solve all the issues. Like, we need informed parents, and we need our kids well, and we need schools and other professionals sort of adding in the mix. So this I see as an extension of a lot of the other things you guys are already doing. So, yeah. So you asked about me. I've, like you all, have been a therapist for a long time, 30 years. It's just crazy. I used to be the young one in the room, now the oldest one in the room. And I think through that, just really have had a lot of different experiences. through growing up in community mental health and going into people's homes and doing in-home family therapy and knowing very little and, going from a place of really not knowing what I was doing, but really being surrounded by some incredible people and mentors, and fortunate enough to continue to be encouraged to get training and educated. So, without going into a detail, but, history and community mental health, working in forensic settings, which, specifically like correctional facilities, but also working with people that are, coming out into the community, probation and parole, whose lives have been really turned upside down. I mean, they oftentimes have, done things that have hurt a lot of people, but they themselves are then reentering the community and needing to figure out like how to reestablish and find a place. And so that's also been a part of my role. And then spent a pretty lengthy time in university mental health, where I still spend time, but really loving that group of that age range, that traditional kind of 18 to 22, working with parents and those youth at a really critical developmental time. And that's really where I also got into a lot of the work in crisis management and knowing how to respond to students in crisis, whether it was a suicidal crisis or psychotic, episode, or, like you were talking, like a situation like where maybe a homicidal threat. And that really launched a lot of my work into the threat world. I was in university mental health at the time of the tragic Virginia Tech situation, shooting, and not that we didn't need to pay attention to the issues before then, but
it brought it to the surface.
It brought it to the surface, and that and Columbine were sort of the ones you look back historically, and that we started really trying to figure out more effective ways to understand when someone's at risk and how to respond effectively. And so I've been on that journey really, for the last, better part of 20 years. And more recently in my, private practice and consulting work, partnering with schools or workplaces to try to, help create these sort of early identification systems of, how do we know when someone's struggling and what are the early signs and how to effectively respond so that, it doesn't end in a tragic, episode, but hopefully someone's struggling and we get them help, and we interrupt what, could lead to something really disastrous in our communities.
So, when I talk to people, I don't have the specialty that you have, but when I talk to people about this subject, it feels so heavy because it is. It's heavy, it's personal. Even if it hasn't personally affected you, somehow it feels personal, right? If you're a parent or a school, a kid, everyone has some kind of connection to schools. And for some reason, school shootings is not the only ones, right? There's been a lot of tragic shootings that have happened that are not even at a school campus, but that's something that we go to every day.
Yeah.
Or there's loved ones at every day. And so I guess what I want to know, I've always wondered, and I guess this is a good chance to ask you, is how do you cope emotionally? Just hearing, because I imagine what you hear about on a daily basis, doing this work, working with organizations or schools or families. How do you kind of manage yourself? I'll give a quick story, which is there was a local tragedy that happened, and you and I were working together, and I was pregnant, and I remember I just wanted to go in and help, and I didn't even have any clue how I would help, but you stopped me, and I'll never forget that moment. I have told you that you protected me from how that would impact me. I didn't even think about how that might impact me, and you told me to pause and think about that. And so I never I thanked you for that. And I've told you that was very meaningful to me, but I've never asked you, how do you handle it?
Yeah. I don't think there's one way I handle it. And I think each situation has a different response. I have a different response to, and I think some of the scenarios in our own community definitely have a deeper impact on me. And I remember, in the post response to that, where our company was really involved in follow up and those nights after we would lead those support groups. I mean, I just feeling my body sort of just activated, and those were nights when my sleep wasn't real good, and and so to answer your question, really needing to have my own space and people to process with that can hold that information. And I do. I sort of feel really fortunate that I have sort of people that are on the journey with me and that I can text or call and say, man, I need to unload this. Like, I can't get this thing that was said out of my head, or I'm having this reaction, or emotional or thought reaction that is really troubling for me. And so definitely not in any way, even though like people will say sometimes, you look so calm in the middle of it. Internally, there's a lot happening, and there's also things that I choose not to go into. So sometimes people think, oh, you're just so comfortable going into those things. No, not always. There are things that I say no to, either because there's too much of a personal connection to it, or maybe I'm, both either because I either know people that are involved in it, or it's in my community, or and that I'm needing to sort of say, you know what, I'm going to sit on the sidelines on this one, and that's okay.
But that's impressive. I love that about you, because I think it's hard to know what your limits are. But it sounds like over the years you've kind of figured out at least the bumper lanes for yourself.
Yeah, and it really, it's evolved over time. I would say that earlier in my career, sort of had this sort of belief that I can handle all these. Just like the more the better.
Like kind of how I was that day, where I was ready to just go in and unknowingly just throw myself in there.
And I think like in that example, again, it's that need to be able to have people around you who are looking out for the stuff you can't see.
Yeah.
And
relying on that.
And relying on that. Like, again, we have blinders to what we do, and we need, and this is why I like being, even I'm in private practice, like try to have like such a community around me that I can easily bounce stuff off of, or having people who are willing to be honest with me about, like, you seem really overwhelmed right now. Is this the best thing for you to be doing?
To hold you accountable.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess because like this is such a big topic, right? And I'm even just talking about it in how it affects you, my mind is racing, right? My mind is thinking about what does the world, what do you think is like the world's misconception about threat and risk? Because I imagine you talk to a lot of people. You've educated us and our team and a lot of local organizations, including schools. So what have you found that people, maybe it's like something that's very obvious to you, or that you see very clearly that organizations could do a better job in paying attention to?
Well, I talk a lot about sort of the, like, really understanding, like we all have our kind of emotional reaction to events or to things we hear or concerns we have. That oftentimes leads us down a road to what we think we should do. It's kind of like as therapists, we talk about sort of that, the gut reaction, or like that clinical,
like a feeling.
Clinical judgment kind of thing. And then I'm not saying that some of that's not valid, but oftentimes it's super critical to have other sources of data when we're making decisions about things. So like, for example, like if you have like a suicidal client, and they make a statement that is concerning, not to say it's not, rather than just, even though we may have fear that comes up in our body and we may want to just like say, oh gosh, we got to make sure they're okay. And do they need to be hospitalized? Like we have to slow down and gather more data,
Which is the hard part, because I think we have reactions.
Yeah.
But whoever this, if it's a kid or even if it's not a kid, right, adult, you have a reaction, whether you're scared or you're worried or it triggers something in you.
Right. And that reaction could come from our own histories. It could come from previous cases that we've worked with. It could come from fears that if we're not doing the right thing, we're going to get sued or somebody's going to be mad at us. All that stuff just
floods in.
It floods in. And again, it's not that that's wrong. Any of those things aren't wrong. But in terms of making decisions, we want to make decisions that are based on good data.
Right.
And so we need a system to fall back on to help us really gather data in a meaningful way that takes into consideration the factors that we really know are helpful at making a better assessment of risk, whether it's harm to self or others or any other mental health concern we're dealing with. So I think if I always have a sell, it's asking people, what's your system? How are you going about making decisions about these super critical cases? And what is the basis for the system that you're using? And sometimes, places are, they're using well quantified measures and ways of interviewing, and they're really coming to a conclusion based on data and systems that are shown to be valid. And then other times, unfortunately, it's like they're being driven more by fear, or by there's sort of a I think of a recent case like where it's like the kid was sort of known as a good kid. And like, he would never do that. And,
So it colors the experience.
Right. Which, again, is data. Like we want to look at, okay, what's the history we have with this kid?
Right.
But then also having to take into consideration the other data. Like, okay, they made a really specific threat towards this other kid. About using
new data.
About using a specific weapon that is in their house.
Wow. Yeah.
And
that changes it.
And then, oh, by the way, they were also drawing pictures that were very concerning, or, journaling about something concerning.
So this all adds up.
Oh, the friends that they used to have, they've disconnected from those friends. They had an outburst in the cafeteria a couple of weeks ago that was really out of character.
I see where you're going with this. It's all kind of accumulating into being higher risk,
right?
Because of all the factors.
And what oftentimes happens is there's a lot of data out there, but it's not all put together.
So you taught me a lot about this subject, and we use it every day in the work that we do. And that's the thing that I think always stands out to me the most, is that part that you said, we can't do this work in a silo. Mm-hmm. You have to communicate so that the information is all gathered and all able to be in one place, which is what I think you're talking about, right?
Exactly.
And we try really hard. Of course, we have to usually have consent, but there's also times where you can not need consent when it comes to this level of risk. But trying to communicate and collaborate, this feels different. It feels imperative to the safety of actually our whole community, because I always think, I have this one piece of information that by itself is not such a factor, right? But what if this other person, what if this school counselor has information that adds, like you were just saying, that all put all together And maybe the family has information that we haven't asked about.
Yeah.
But can we put it all together to then know, is this actually worse than we thought? Or actually, maybe there's protective factors that I actually don't know about.
Yeah.
So
Right.
thank you for teaching me that. And
Well,
I'd like to know more.
And let me respond to something you said that I remember one time we were on the phone, like I was consulting with you guys on a case, and the issue became clear that you were thinking ahead, not just about this clinical case, but you were thinking about the school community. You were
Right.
thinking about the broader community. And I think what we know is that even though that client sitting in front of us, they are our primary responsibility. I think in this work, like one of the things that to be effective in it is you really do have to think about sort of the ripple effect
Right.
that the threats, or if it leads to, an attack, like it is affecting a lot of people, as we see. And
Right.
and so again, while we can't let the fear that something horrific is going to happen, influence us, to the point where we're overreacting. Like I think there is, I think that's what's a little bit different about like doing this threat assessment work is you really you're thinking like it's a community intervention in a way, and you are having to think about these other steps, and then like you're saying, gathering, because that community within which that kid or that person resides, whether it's their workplace or they have valuable information,
Right.
and sometimes
Whether they know it or not.
and they oftentimes don't know it.
Yeah.
Because when we start asking questions, they're kind of like, oh yeah, I hadn't,
Right.
it was kind of odd,
Right.
but hadn't really thought about that. And likewise, sometimes too, you're finding, maybe there's been some real mistreatment of that person, that the kid has been really bullied in the place, and school's not really aware of it, or maybe they are aware of it. But part of like sort of bringing to the surface some of that contextual information is that even though like we're going to do everything we can to sort of like help, the person get those harmful thoughts out of their head and manage differently.
Mm-hmm.
If we're not sort of making some recommendations and offering ideas to the family and the communities in which they reside, like
What are we doing?
And we're really not going to be as effective clinically.
Yeah.
And so that always, and I do, I have some workplaces and schools that are just like, it's great. We want to know what we can do to be part of the solution. And then I have other places that are like, nope, just want to know that those thoughts are gone. And it's just not that simple. So the assessment is really far-reaching and really trying to pull data, but the solution is also community is really involves a lot of other people to effectively make sure this person is okay and they can continue down a path where they're okay and their community's okay.
Yeah, and my experience has been, I'm just curious about yours, is that most people who are in any kind of field, especially working with youth, they do really want to help. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they don't know how. Sometimes they're like you said, fear gets in the way. Another thing you taught me is that sometimes we don't ask the questions because we don't want to hear the answer. Mm-hmm. And that really helped me in sitting with, especially with kids. Sometimes you don't want to ask if they want to kill somebody because you're afraid that what the answer might be.
Yeah.
And that's our own work
mm-hmm.
as the adults. But like I said, I think that most of the time people want better. Nobody wants a disaster to happen.
Right.
But it's a matter of, I think, just getting educated and, like you said, having a system to fall back on so things don't get dropped. Like you might just accidentally forget something very important when you're in the situation. Another thing that I wanted to talk about, how are we doing with time? Okay, another thing I wanted to talk about that I think happens a lot. Okay, another thing I wanted to talk about with you is because I feel very protective. We work with a lot of kids who have come from a system like a school system usually, or a family system, and maybe have become labeled as like a threat. And sometimes there is very good reason for that. Sometimes there's not. Also, people sometimes say things that they don't always mean. And, I can say I used to work at a school, and I remember that there was a student that was introduced to me as, this person, we are worried they're going to be a school shooter. And that's how this kid was introduced to me. And so how do I not come in with a bias, right? How do I not come in with all my bells and whistles, trying to understand? It's like I felt like I needed to figure it out. Well, long story short is that actually this person was bullied and was mad. And so there were some risk factors that I didn't know about then, but I know now.
Yeah.
But then, sometimes kids carry that label with them as like the bad person or someone who is ostracized. And it actually sometimes makes the bullying and the mistreatment of them worse.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really tricky thing especially for the adults. Like, how do we pay attention and communicate that concern, but also be really mindful of not accidentally putting kids in these boxes that then they have to follow. We had another kid that we met along the way that's their biggest anxiety, was that they thought the whole community saw them that way because they made a comment that was very silly and not appropriate when they were really little. I think it was 4th grade. And it followed them into young adulthood.
Yeah. Well, I sure hope I wouldn't be judged on the things I said when I was in 4th grade.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're speaking to like this bias that starts to develop, like, and particularly around, I think, like concerning behaviors, but and it's like, I think we have to, when we hear those kind of comments, this kid is a school shooter, or they're nuts, or they're like, our job as professionals and as helpers, and I think, is to be curious. Like, hey, help me understand. What you mean by that, and what is it you're seeing, and so trying to kind of take it from, like, to me, that's an emotional statement, and
it's fear, right?
It's fear, and so like our job is to, understand, like you're saying, like try to get into like understanding, what do they mean? What are the things they're concerned about that lead them to this idea or this picture that they meet the profile of someone who is going to go be a school shooter. Again, not to say that I'm not concerned about that. I am concerned about that, but I'm also more concerned, and we should be probably more concerned about their risk to hurt themselves than to hurt other people. Now, again, if they're making comments that are homicidal in nature, that are threatening,
definitely pay attention. We have to pay attention.
But I see oftentimes it's like, well, they dress this way, or they
listen to this music.
They listen to this music, or they have these dark thoughts, or
video games.
And so, but we want to kind of get in and understand, again, tie it to data that we know is relevant, that is current. Again, we don't want to be judged on our worst day, but I think, to your point, sometimes kids will get sort of labeled on a path, and then whether overtly or covertly, people start to treat them that way.
Right. Like, is it a self-fulfilling prophecy at some point?
That's right. Yeah. So from a school perspective, I mean, this is so, like, this is where we have to get involved and do our kind of social work with helping the family, making sure this kid gets help.
Yeah.
Helping this kid get into activities where he may be seen differently, where he doesn't have all that history or baggage. As adults, like, just imagine, like, if you, in your community or some place where you show up, like, you're known to be labeled in a certain negative way.
Oh, yeah. It can tear you down.
And my guess is you're not going to continue. You have choice and agency to step out and find a different community. Like, I don't need to put up with that.
Right.
But as a kid,
you
have no power to do that.
Yeah, that's true.
And so so sometimes, like, for these kids, it is having to have a change of environment. where they get a fresh start. People can see them differently and have a different experience of them. But the family also having to help the kid like see themselves differently.
That's true.
And that's part of our work therapeutically
Just
is
to help the parents.
okay, you've got this identity that you kind of attached to, and there's, like look, when you're young, it's all about attaching to something and figuring out who you are. And they're like in a weird way, there may be some payoff sort of having that association with being the school shooter kid because
it's an identity. Maybe it's
and kids may not bully you as much because there's fear that comes with that identity.
That's true.
And so
it quote unquote it worked. It got the kids off, but it continues to isolate the kid, and and probably does increase risk over time because we know things like isolation and just sort of feeling like an outsider, and again that's a dangerous place to be for anyone, but particularly a vulnerable youth, right?
When they don't feel like they have they're known for anything else. Yeah.
It's interesting because I brought up this example from when I worked at a school, and as we're sitting here talking about it, I'm thinking I'll never know, but this person got intervention. It forced me to talk to them every day as a school counselor and check in, keep eyes. Everyone had eyes. And eventually this person got a lot of support. And it turned out that there's just, a sweet person trying to find an identity, exactly what you just said. And just as we're sitting here talking, I'm wondering, maybe that was an example of that this person, the path changed because of the support. We'll never know, right? If there was not that support in place, might this story have gone differently? Because I didn't know this person before, right? I only know what my experience was after really getting to know, and probably the first time an adult sat down and wanted to just have interest in getting to know this teenager. So it's just, I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, and it's kind of going back to a comment you made a few minutes ago about like really effectively assessing like situations like this. Yeah, we're assessing risk factors, but we're also really assessing those protective factors, those things that are going to support like healthier behavior or, restoration or rehabilitation, and putting as much energy into those things as we are into trying to reduce the risk. Sometimes it's all about, well, once the homicidal thoughts are lower, okay, we're good.
Right.
And we know, of course, we know that's not true.
Right.
But like having to kind of ask ourselves, what are we doing? So like when I'm making recommendations to like a school or workplace, like I'm really recommending, like how do we build in more of those protective factors in that environment?
So it's preventative.
So it's like, it's not just, okay, they go to counseling, but let's see if we can get this kid a mentor.
Right.
That not their therapist, but somebody that is safe that they can go talk to a couple times a week, particularly coming out of a crisis. Who, if they're living on a campus, let's make sure the RA knows this person may need some extra help. Right. Are there's some other kids that would be willing to help out or go to dinner with them. Just this, they sound simple, but again, going through like a crisis like this is incredibly isolating.
Right.
And even though you may come out of the crisis and we may see that the risk has been reduced or the media concern, like there's still a lot of work on the other end of it to hope to help the person heal and actually help the community heal to where maybe the community starts to see them differently too.
And they hopefully see themselves differently.
Yeah.
Like that there's purpose and, reason, what is it? We call it life worth living, right? Something to look forward to in the future.
Yeah, hope.
Hope, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess, I have a lot of questions. This is a topic that I feel really strongly about. I kind of, shifting gears a little bit though, from professional Adelina and thinking more as a parent. What would you say to parents who, like me, sometimes have these intrusive thoughts and worry about sending their kids to any place that could be in danger. And by the way, just because I'm not with my kids doesn't mean there's any less or more danger. There could be danger when I'm there too. So what would you say to parents? How do you manage that? Also, what would you say to me?
Well, I'm a parent too.
Yeah.
And so just to normalize some of those fears, I mean, again, I think, in weeks like this where there's been multiple
It's worse on
episodes across our country, I'm thinking when I'm rolling up to drop my kid off to school, I'm feeling and thinking differently. I mean, that's just, I don't know how to not do that. That's real. And so, on one hand, it's, my kid's of high school age. And so, he's aware of what's going on in the world. And so checking in with my kid and, seeing how he's doing with everything and how he's being affected. But, I'm also conscious of when I drop my kid off, like, are there teachers around? Does it look safe? Do I know if my kid's school has like policies and procedures about how they keep kids safe in school?
Yeah.
So, I think from a parent perspective, I try to acknowledge and, I think it's a very healthy reaction to have some of those feelings. Also reminding myself that, like the overwhelming majority of the time, kids are safe in school. And so it's trying to balance that out and taking those, appropriate precautions, like by asking, questions and making sure there are things in place and having conversations about, like I know they've had, school shooter drills, and asking him about, what would happen if that was to happen at your school? Do you know what you would do? I think it's okay to have some of those conversations, particularly like when stuff has recently happened and they're aware of it.
And everything.
Right. Because I think it sort of empowers them to know that there is a plan. Like the adults in their world have thought this out and they know what they're doing.
And we've seen, I think you taught me that, we've seen that the research shows that when there is a plan, it does mitigate risk. Yeah. Even if there's still tragedy. Yeah. It sometimes makes the tragedy a little bit.
I mean, I wish we could have a zero risk, world in a school environment. But unfortunately, we can't. But we can, help also our kids to recognize that when something doesn't feel right, of what they would do, who they would talk to.
And to do something.
It's just the whole, see something, say something.
Right.
And teaching our kids sort of that bystander, intervention work that we do a lot in schools where we're trying to raise sort of the emotional awareness on a campus to, when you see somebody in distress, like not just sort of assume, well, I'm sure somebody else will take care of that.
Right.
Or if, see somebody come onto campus that's not familiar, kind of looks off, doesn't look like they should be there, like go and talk to someone. Yeah. And I think that's continues to be, part of our prevention work is, look, it's not that we're saying that every kid now needs to assume responsibility for every bad thing that happens on campus or in the
be part of it because they're also going to grow up and become adults.
Yeah, and they're dealing with it anyway. I mean, you ask kids about, what are their biggest concerns in the world. I mean, the truth is most of them have been touched by whether it's a real threat on their campus, whether it's a bomb threat, whether it's something, most of them have been affected. Like this generation, like it's kind of more than norm. It's sad to say, but then giving them ways to be part of the solution, I think is without, making it everything. So I think as a parent, it's, like not making it the first discussion point every night when you come home over dinner, like, oh, so, were there any threatening people there today? Or do you have any bomb threats? Or, but it's part of their world that we're checking in about, and how they feel in their school environment, and
also how we respond, right? Because if we respond with like, what, who, what did you say? Then it sends them spinning, right?
Yeah.
But if we can respond in a calm way, which is hard when you don't feel calm.
Really hard.
But if you start to hear suspicious things and your spidey senses are going up, I think it's important. And I'm saying this knowing that it's a work I have to do with my kids. But if my daughter's starting to say something that is concerning me, I have to keep cool. Otherwise, she's going to stop talking.
That's right.
Right. And we see that a lot with teens and with young adults, that they don't want to talk to someone who's going to then become dysregulated. Now I have to take care of you. No, this didn't work.
Yeah.
So we have to stay regulated.
Yeah. And I think we have to just check our own, our not just our emotional, but, we have our own thoughts that are coming up about situations.
And we have more information sometimes.
And we have more information, and being cautious not to sort of let our narrative on what's happened sort of, overexposing our kids to that. We're trying to draw them out. We're trying to help them make sense. What are they hearing? I'll ask them, like, so, like this week, asking, my son, so, what's the vibe on campus about, this thing that happened?
Mm-hmm.
What are people saying? What do you think about this? Trying to get into their world and understanding what's influencing their interpretation of events,
right?
is super critical.
Because they're also hearing what they're hearing from whoever it is that they're around.
Oh, who they're around and what they're watching, what they're listening to.
Yeah.
They have a lot of inputs into like the interpretation and the experience they're having.
Yeah, it's like the whole thing about, if 6 people can witness the same car accident and they can have different stories around it, right?
Yeah.
I think this happens a lot with crises other than car accidents, that there's different perspectives. And so which one do you kind of swallow whole?
Right.
And sometimes kids just have what they have, whatever that.
Yeah.
So sometimes I think talking about it allows you to have a little bit more understanding of what they're hearing.
Exactly. And if it's really inaccurate, or it's a really strong emotional thing, it's being okay to, hopefully say, you know what, well, there's a lot of things out there right now about this event. I think we're still a lot that's not known, and, this is tragic and this is horrible. And, I think, sometimes in these events we need to pause a little bit.
Let's learn more.
Let's learn a little bit more. But understanding, like, for adults and kids alike, like, we want to figure out what happened and why it happened right away, because we
want to make meaning of the horrible thing.
Yeah, and sometimes that's accurate, and sometimes it's not, because we're trying to get closure on it. When some things are, and most of these really difficult things they're pretty complex, and they're not one thing. They're not just one easy answer to it.
Right. The closure is not going to be wrapped up in a pretty bow.
No.
It's going to be complicated.
Yeah.
One thing I'm struggling with is, I work with kids. I've worked with kids for a long time. Blake and I have been trained to speak in like kid language about things. But this is one that I think it's because of my own fears and my own anxieties around it. I'm struggling with how much do I talk. I have an elementary school aged kid, and I'm really struggling with, what is the language? How much is too much? And what's not enough about how to explain this? Because you're right. As a high school student, I think it's safe to assume with social media and everything, they know what's going on. I don't know how much my kid knows. And I don't know. I don't want to just introduce new problems, but I also want to be prepared.
Yeah.
What would you say is like appropriate?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Because it depends on the kid too, right?
It depends on the kid.
Yeah.
It depends on their level of exposure to like an event. I mean, I think, it's like you come through a week like this, and you've probably protected your kid in terms of not, having the TV on where they were sitting watching
The
footage and whatnot. And maybe they know, maybe they don't know. Just, and so, we want to protect kids and not overexpose them to things that are going to be triggering for them. And it's going to be really difficult to process if they have some knowledge of events.
Right.
Sort of being able to, again, I think the first step is just being curious about what they know and what they think about things, rather than feeling like we need to, give big long explanations but trying to find language that's developmentally appropriate for them, and that's again, I think it depends on the kid. I think it depends on.
Yeah. But actually this conversation helps. Just even thinking about helping identify, like, who are the safe people on campus? Who would you go to if there was something that felt off in your body? Or like, how would you know in your body if there was something that made you feel unsafe?
Yeah.
So those things I think are appropriate no matter what, because those are skills that need to be taught.
Yeah. And there's definitely some resources out there that I'd be happy to share with you guys in terms of putting those up there, like, so what do you say to the elementary school age, the middle school, that, I think American Psychological Association has put out
some language,
some guidance around languaging that might be helpful. But again, I think it comes back to, level of exposure, developmental level.
Totally. Yeah.
But I think as a parent, I think this is where, we have to be able to, you come home and it's like on one hand, you're affected when you have these kind of weeks. And I think particularly like as a helper or as a parent, like your emotional response is probably showing up. And so like my kid, he's like, noticed like, what's wrong with you this week? And it's like, it's been a hard week.
On Wednesday, both Blake and I thought it was Friday.
Yeah.
And we kind of laughed about it, but then I thought about it. That's why Wednesday already felt like it was so long.
Yeah. And so it's trying to have this congruent, making sure like we're not, when we're having an emotional response, and even if we're managing it well, it's showing up, and like wanting to validate that to our kids, like, yeah, I'm really just trying to sort this out. Like, I don't have any answers. I don't, but I'm scared, I'm frustrated, and I'm angry, so that, they're seeing, and, I think a healthy representation of like what going through difficult things looks like.
Yeah, you're modeling like your experience.
Exactly, rather than being pissed off and, again, kind of going down a road that's not going to be like an extreme road that's not going to be helpful for them.
Right. That now they're
like, we're trying to model like we want to think deeply about this and not be so reactive, and yet it is affecting us.
Yeah, I mean, even right now, when we were talking and I said, how do you handle this? And your response was, well, it's hard for me. And that made me feel better, because you're modeling to me that what I experience is on some level normal. And that even you, who I look up to, you're my mentor in this area, you also have those feelings. So like, that's very similar to, I think, kids and parents, right? They're looking to us.
Yeah.
What do you do? How do you handle it? And there's something really grounding about being able to say, I haven't figured it out yet. I'm not sure how I feel yet, but here are the things I'm doing to try to figure that out, right? Because then you're actually showing them how they could do it, potentially. So this is like, I'm just even feeling this conversation, it feels heavy, right? There's a lot that we're talking about. I'm reliving things. I'm putting myself in people's shoes listening to this right now. And I did want to kind of shift gears to maybe some hope, like takeaways in terms of like, can you give us some examples of times where you feel like it was successful, this plight of all of us trying to do better?
Well, yeah. And I think it's unfortunate that we don't get to talk about the situations in the cases where, some sort of attack is averted because professionals, community members, family members were aware, were conscious, and stepped in and helped people get the help they needed.
Yeah, let's give that some space.
And there are multiple times over many more of those cases than there are of tragedies. And so we have to remember that. But of course, those are not in the media. Those are not things that
we don't know about them.
You don't know
sometimes.
about them. So, again, it's in the cases I work with, it's because someone has paid attention. And those stories oftentimes are, they have really good outcomes. Where a kid or person in a workplace wasn't getting the appropriate help, and they didn't kick the kid out of school. Obviously, safety was assessed and determined that they were okay to stay or in the workplace, and the trajectory of that person's life has changed, and
the lives around them. Probably.
Lives around them are changed. So I mean, there's a lot of reason for hope in terms of like engaging in a really, robust, program of threat assessment and response. We're not just trying to catch bad actors. That's not the point of, threat assessment or any kind of managing crisis. It's to, hopefully, stop a path that someone is on, but then restore or help create them and put them on a different path. Right. Like that's the full circle that we're ideally trying to do. And that's how we're trained in this field. Is it's not enough just to stop the bad thing from happening. It's to really, really try to promote well-being. And we do see that in lots of cases. And, and we do. I have these stories, where I'll, many years later, I'll get somebody I assessed will literally, a family or someone will reach out to me and just say, I know we weren't real nice to you in the assessment and, but we were really scared and pissed off, but you know what? You treated us like a human in that assessment. And, we were concerned, you were looking to get us help school, get us kicked out. And actually it was because of your work and your recommendations that kind of put us on the right path. So those stories do happen out there. And so again, I think for a parent or, professional, I think it's remembering that the potential for these good outcomes to happen are much higher. And it does take a little more work to do it well. And I think, again, that's sometimes like from a professional standpoint, it's like, okay, we need to, there's going to be some steps here and there's going to be some work here, but remembering what the end result could look like and how it could look different, to me, is the rewarding part of what I do when I'm involved in these kind of cases.
Yeah, same. I mean, I think it is more work, but also aren't we always learning? There's always room to learn. There's always room to improve. And yeah, we've also had experiences like that where families come back and say, things are different because of the intervention, which is why we keep doing the work we do, right?
Yeah.
It's worth it.
That's right.
It's totally worth it, even if one person's life is improved.
That's right.
So what I know I said that was going to be I was going to wrap up, but I actually have a question for you that came up as you were just talking. What's your favorite part of this work that you do?
I don't think I've ever been asked that.
I can guess what your least favorite part is.
I think it's, I'll tell you that when things are clicking in the way that I think ideally they're drawn up to be, it's that ability to, at the conclusion of an assessment, to sit and work with a team of people, whether that's the parents or treatment providers or a school, and really have a productive conversation about a case and to really develop a plan of action. Like, that's rewarding. I think it's also, I love the part of the process of threat assessment is you're kind of like a detective. Mm-hmm. You're really trying to continue to ask your questions of what else, where else do I need to be looking for? You're mining data, And, and fortunately, I mean, we have guides that like are, really help us to figure out where do we need to look for data? Who else do we need to talk to? And that, that those moments when you get either that point of data that kind of supports what you're thinking, that's like, oh, okay, so now I've got multiple data sources that support this is what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Or the flip side is sometimes you get a contradictory thing of, oh, thank goodness I asked that question, or I sought out that potentially, conflicting piece of data. And it's just a reminder of, again, I mean, the human experience is really complex. And,
sure.
Some people want to think it's just this, well, this leads to this leads to this sort of thing about anyone who goes out and commits an act of violence. And what I can tell you is that it is so like these, while there are similar themes in these stories, there's a lot of different ways that people get to that place, and we know that in general from, all mental health concerns. But these two, like no one wakes up one day and just is like, oh, you know what, I just want to go hurt a bunch of people. There's a lot that leads to that place. And I want to uncover, I want to get that story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's like, as part of the assessment, if I think of like when I'm doing the assessment, it's also when the person across from me who's maybe made a really scary comment or, some of their behavior, it's that point when they can see that I see them as a human and that I'm not there to like see them get in trouble, or like there's an energy that changes in the conversation where they start to feel safe, and then I'm actually interested in understanding their perspective. Yeah. Like that's a moment that always feels really good as an assessment person.
Well, I think that's something you do really well, is that your demeanor, you're calm, and I think your background in motivational interviewing is probably helping you in that, in just making people not feel judged. And then you're more, I would be more likely to open up to someone if I didn't feel that they were judging me, and that maybe they saw me for who I was, that I'm struggling too, So I'm just thinking also now, okay, someone's listening to this and they're thinking, wow, Robert sounds like an amazing resource for my community, my school, my organization. What's next? How can somebody get a hold of you and like have more of a detailed conversation with you, or maybe even get your support?
Yeah. Well, I mean, absolutely. And whether it's me or other professionals that work in my field, I mean, again, if you're seeing or, there's things that you're concerned about.
These kinds of concerns happen every day, all the time, and everywhere. So if someone who's listening wants to get a hold of you and get more information about how to support their community, how do they go about doing it? I know we're going to put it in our show notes, but maybe you can just speak a little bit about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so for me directly, probably it's connecting with me on my website, which is really simple. It's roberttherapy.com. And there's my contact information is listed in there. And, the other thing is I do some consulting and work with a larger national threat agency company called Deep Prep Safety, and it's deepprepsafety.com. And I think that's that's one of the things is I work with a team of people. I'm not working in isolation here. And so I have my community members here, but I have people that are experts, from the fields of law enforcement, from higher ed, from workplace safety, work with a team of people that come from a lot of different perspectives. So it's, I'm a mental health trained, but have a lot of different perspectives. Another organization that is helpful is the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals, referred to as ATAP, which is a national, kind of one of the leading organizations. So there are lots of resources out there. I'm happy to be I always talk about as, sometimes I'm the first stop.
Yeah, you're our go-to.
And I'm not always the right person. And so my job is to help people get where they need to get to. And so, there's just as many times that I'm referring people to someone else, and maybe I'm not even the right kind of person to be talking with. If there's like an immediate threat, it's like you need to be talking to law enforcement,
Right.
not me. So happy to be a resource to anyone.
Well, we appreciate you as a resource. Like you mentioned, I'm very grateful that we can call you and consult and trust that you do have that whole network that's also behind you, which it makes a really big difference when you're dealing with something so important. So thank you for that work, and thank you for being here and talking to us and sharing some of your knowledge and experience with our community.
Yeah. And thankful to you, Adelina and Blake, for doing this and really trying to reach out to the community.
We're excited. Thanks for being part of it.